Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The BC government is introducing a new real estate flipping tax on homes resold within 2 years. Will it make a difference in curbing speculation and easing the housing market? We're taking your calls. After 12:30, the annual Child Poverty Report is out. We'll be joined by the group First Call and ask you, what are the long-term consequences of child poverty in our province? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on the CBC News app, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Well, this morning, Premier David Eby and Housing Minister Ravi Kahlon announced the legislation to introduce a new flipping tax in BC for any homes resold within 2 years of purchase. It would take effect next January and would slap a 20% levy on homes sold within a year of purchase and will keep declining until the end of the second year. There will be exemptions for certain life circumstances, including separation or divorce, death, disability or illness, involuntary job loss, relocation for work, personal safety, and insolvency. Premier Eby says the tax will support families who want a home.
Try to imagine, as a family, somehow you've managed to scrape together a down payment for a place. You've done the math, you sat down with the bank, you figured out the mortgage, and you're able to do it, and you and your realtor are putting in a bid for a home, and then it comes back that you are one of 5 offers for the home, and the other 4 offers are all coming from investors who want to buy the place and flip it for a higher price. Families should not be competing with investors for a place to live.
Now, the province says between 2020 and 2022, about 7% of residential home sales were sold within 2 years. We're going to hear from the BC Real Estate Association in just a moment, and we're asking you for your thoughts. Would a house flipping tax help curb speculation in real estate? Are you concerned about the impact of flipping on home prices? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, we're at bctoday@cbc.ca. You can also text us 236-330-2623. That's 236-330-2623. Brendan Ogmanson is Chief Economist for the BC Real Estate Association, and he's on the line now. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What do you think of this new flipping tax? Will it help to curb speculation buying?
When we think about flipping tax, we need to think about how this affects demand, but also how it's going to affect supply. On the demand side, you heard the Premier say that it's about 7% of transactions within 2 years. 2 years is not the most conventional way to think of a flipping. I think more flipping activity, it's very short-term activity. Less than, for homes that were purchased and sold within 1 year is about 3% of sales. So it's a pretty low number. It's already an activity that's pretty heavily taxed at the federal level. And so, which is one of the reasons why there's not very much of it occurring. So the demand impact is going to be very, very small. We estimate maybe somewhere between 1% and 2% reduction in sales. The real problems are on the supply side, where there's some real unintended consequences.
Okay, and so when you say 2 years is too long and even a year, typically what would be the time frame for flipping a home?
Well, I think of most, like the way I would define flipping activity is really about speculators entering a market to take advantage of short-term changes in market conditions. So market starts to overheat for some reason. Maybe interest rates fell to really low levels, as we've seen many times in the past decade. Markets start to heat up. Investors get attracted by price gains really kind of outstripping their normal kind of growth. And therefore you get kind of investors coming in, and it kind of accelerates things. That's the most harmful version of flipping activity.
Okay. And how many months would that be?
Yeah, that's usually like a 6-month period, and that type of those types of transactions are less than 2% of sales.
Okay. And so you think that this tries to do something or target demand, but that the issue is actually with supply?
Well, the way the policy works has some real potential unintended consequences for supply in a time when we badly need supply, especially of resale supply, so listings. Because it's this is a 2-year window. There's lots of different situations, and I know there's exemptions, but there are a lot of reasons why people sell within a 2-year period. And now you're being provided with an incentive to delay that listings activity. So there's a real chance that once this policy hits, there's going to be a lot of sellers that are just going to put off listing for a year or longer in order to avoid this tax. That means listings will fall, market conditions will be tighter than they would be otherwise. There's also, it's not clear yet how this policy applies to pre-sales. So you buy a pre-sale years before the unit is completed and ready to live in. Once it's completed, is that when the property transfers, is that the start date for assessing the flipping tax?
Okay.
If so, upon completion, usually we see some listings activity there as well. That could be discouraged. Overall, it won't take much because the demand impact's not that large. So it doesn't take a whole lot of a dip in supply to get actually counterproductive results where prices end up higher than they would be otherwise, without a flipping tax.
Okay. If barring those exemptions that I've just listed, that the province has said, whether it's a loss of work, moving for work, divorce or separation, who is buying a home and selling within a year, if not to flip it, if not a speculation buyer?
Well, not many. That's why the numbers are pretty low. It's 3%. And actually within that 3% right now is everyone that's already, for reasons that are on that list of exemptions. So the actual share of people who are really just flipping and are not selling for some change in their personal circumstances is actually much lower than 3%. So it's a very low number,
Right.
A very low share of sales that are occurring because of just trying to take advantage of prices.
And so if the number is that low, how would this affect supply?
Because you're providing now an incentive not to list, right? So if for some reason I bought a house 15 months ago and now I'd like to sell it, and I, for whatever reason, don't qualify for one of the exemptions, or I'm just not aware of the exemptions, not everyone is really always paying that much attention. You're going to have people who would delay listing, and same thing on the completion side. There's some people that maybe plan to list their home as soon as the unit completed. I'm not sure now that's not going to be taxed.
But you've just said, though, that, and given these numbers, it's a very small percentage of people, right? A small percentage of homes that are resold.
On the demand side, but if there is enough of a disincentive to list, and it doesn't take much in our calculations, it's only about a 5 to 10% dip in new listings that would have to occur for the price impact to be actually counterproductive.
If people, and I take your point about how many and at what point people are selling, but if people are buying homes, that first time for the purpose of speculation, for the purpose of just holding on to it in order to resell at a higher price, haven't they already taken away from the tight housing market? Haven't they already edged out buyers who plan to live in the home?
So again, those are very low shares, and they're sort of, this is where they're
But does it
taking
make it
advantage
worth
of
it
the
to
term.
put in place this tax?
No, you're gonna dampen some of speculation, like the very short term. But again, it's already taxed really heavily. If you are an investor, you're paying either a capital gains tax, or if you're deemed to be a flipper by the federal government, you're actually paying, I believe it gets added to your income. You're paying an income tax or a business rate. So this is activity that's pretty heavily taxed already, and now the province is going to tax it again. Which will just discourage some for sure. It'll take away most of the profit from this activity. Mm-hmm. But again, it's a really low number.
One thing I wanted to ask you as well was in the budget document, and Premier Eby was asked about this morning. The budget document also says, the purpose of this tax is to support housing supply, not impede it. And exemptions will be provided for those who add to the housing supply or engage in construction and real estate development. And so this morning, Premier Eby said if you add a laneway home or another unit to that home, that makes you exempt. What do you think of that?
Sure. It's a good idea to not penalize people for adding new units. There are other situations, though, where I'm not sure they qualify for an exemption. We have people who purchase a home as an investment, and they spend a lot of capital and labor to fix up, older homes and then sell them at a profit. But they've improve the housing stock. I'm not sure whether or not that's going to fit the exemption. I'd argue it should. That's economic activity that's improving the housing stock and making our housing stock better than it would be otherwise. They're not necessarily adding a new unit, but they're engaging in construction activity to improve a unit. I'm not sure. It doesn't seem like that's going to be exempt, but I'd argue that it probably should be.
Okay, so it sounds like that's another question we should be following up on as well. Brendan, thank you so much for your time. Good to have your response to this today.
Thank you.
Brendan Ogmanson is Chief Economist for the BC Real Estate Association. And we're taking your calls on this flipping tax to try and curb speculation in real estate. Do you think it will make a difference and ease the housing market? And how concerned are you about flipping in real estate? What impact is it having? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca or text us 236-330-2623. Kirsten is calling from Victoria. Hi, Kirsten. What do you make of this flipping tax?
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
By and large, I agree with the principle of it. However, I believe that the provincial government has forgotten about our first responders and for those that are in the armed forces. For example, they buy a house a year later, they get posted to a different location. What's going to happen to these individuals and their families who have to sell suddenly and move elsewhere? Are they going to be hit with this tax as well? I don't think it's fair for those individuals, but it's more that the spirit of the law, I think, that the provincial government forgot to include in the bill.
Okay, and we do know that there will be exemptions to the home flipping tax, including people who are subject to job relocation or loss. So it sounds like they may be covered, but that's just my initial reading of it. Kirsten, and how often does that happen for first responders? Is that something that's happened to your family?
Thankfully, no. However, I have had neighbors who were in the Navy who did have to move elsewhere. I'm not sure if it was due to a job relocation or a breakdown of a relationship. Mm-hmm. And I do know somebody else I previously have worked with. Their spouse had to move to northern BC as they are an RCMP member, and they had to move. So I'm just curious as to what would happen to them.
Yeah. Okay. More questions about how this will be implemented and who will be exempt. Kirsten, thank you so much for the call. Appreciate it.
Thank you for taking my call.
That's Kirsten joining us from Victoria. It's 12:18, 1:18 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today. And yes, the BC government has introduced the house flipping tax in the 2024 budget, aimed at increasing affordable housing supply. And the tax adds to other measures, such as the speculation and vacancy tax, expanding tax exemptions for new apartment building construction. We're asking you, would a house flipping tax help to curb speculation in real estate? Are you concerned about the impact on flipping on home prices? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And we have some emails coming here as well. Elizabeth writes, although we hear from skeptics that the flipping tax will do little to curb the housing crisis, I think it needs to be viewed in context. It's one of a suite of tools necessary to stem the situation we find ourselves in of housing being a commodity. Generally, those who speak of this as a weak measure are often those who are disappointed because it affects their plans directly. Brent writes, I first advocated a flipping tax to Ed Broadbent in 1988, along with the suggestion the money go to low-income people buying their first home. How much better off would we be now if it was adapted then, 36 years ago? Barbara writes, congrats to Premier Eby on the new tax. This is a move in the right direction to solve the housing crisis. Sincerely, an Islander. Barbara and Brent and Elizabeth, thank you for your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca is our email address. And you can also text us if you prefer to write your comment. You can text them to us as well, 236-330-2623, 236-330-2623. And again, our phone numbers, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Your reaction to the flipping tax in real estate announced today. Andrew joins us now from Kelowna. Thanks for calling in, Andrew.
Hey, how are you?
I am well. What are your thoughts on this flipping tax?
I really think that in general, we really have a housing crisis right across the country. And every time you have an attractive place to live with affordable housing, I find the problem just moves there. So currently, Edmonton is an attractive place to live with lower housing compared to other places. We're in Kelowna ourselves, and in 2013, houses were in the 350s, and basically the problem just moves from everywhere else. So as far as the tax goes, we've owned our house for 4 years. If we were going to get taxed, we would just delay on sale. So I really think that what you really need to do is take your federal funding, actually build houses with it, and get the supply for the people that really need it. The other thing you can do is maybe block investing. I don't really know how that would work, but I feel bad for the people who can't get into the market.
Yeah, and certainly Kelowna is a place you've seen that, especially the last since 2020.
Absolutely. I mean, our house itself has skyrocketed in equity, but it's just build the houses.
Build more supply.
To support your population.
Tackling the supply. Andrew, great to hear from you in Kelowna. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Take care. That's Andrew in Kelowna. 1-800-825-5950 is our toll-free line. If you're calling from the Okanagan, or 604-669-3733 is the local number in Metro Vancouver. Your comments on the real estate flipping tax. So this would be a tax on homes that are resold within 2 years, 20% to start. If it's sold within the first year, it starts to decline after that until it reaches zero, no tax at the 2-year mark. And the goal is to try and ease the housing market. And as what Premier Eby was saying this morning, it's to increase housing supply for people who want to buy homes to live in. Let's get some more reaction now from David Hutniak, who's the CEO of Landlord BC. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. What are your thoughts on the real estate flipping tax?
Well, I think, Brendan, your previous guest, covered a lot of the concerns that we would have. I don't know that it's necessarily going to solve the crisis. And probably if this was done 25 years ago or 20 years ago, maybe it would have a significant impact. But I think there's legitimate concerns here in terms of potential supply issues. As Brendan outlined for you, in terms of rental housing, it would appear as if someone were to purchase a home or duplex and renovate it and put it into a long-term rental housing market, I believe that that would qualify as an exemption. So, from that perspective, because I certainly focus on rental housing. That would be good to see that sort of an exemption. But I understand the Premier and the Housing Minister are looking for sort of a whole menu of potential solutions here to try and address affordability. They're obviously concerned about affordability across the income spectrum. It's just, there's a few of their initiatives that I think are really going to have an impact.
Which ones?
One like this. Well, I think everything they've done in terms of, what was announced last fall with the 3 bills, Bill 44, 46, and 47, where they were, addressing the issue of expediting approvals, looking at zoning to allow for 4 to 6 units on a single family lot. The whole transit-oriented development opportunity, the fact that, up to 20 stories at down to, I guess it's 12, based on how far away from the transit hub those high rises are built. Just allowing or eliminating, I should say, public hearings for projects that fall under the existing community plans that are already pre-approved, basically.
So expediting the process to be
absolutely.
able to build.
I mean, so and then just really, putting a lot more pressure on municipalities to create supply. And I know that's not necessarily popular with all municipalities. They have pointed out some concerns, and I respect those. But at the end of the day, we're in a housing crisis here, and it's long overdue for everybody to really just dig in deep here and just get past some of the objections.
David, what about the short-term rental legislation? How will that impact? Is that going to ensure that more units are put aside for long-term rentals then?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it will. I don't know the number. I mean, it's kind of obvious. If you shut down short-term rental, then the owners of those units have one of two choices: sell the unit or put it into a long-term rental housing market. So I guess that remains to be seen, but it's somewhat intuitive that we're going to see some increased supply from that. Our organization, Landlord BC, we've always felt that short-term rentals were negatively impacting the long-term market. Having said that, I mean, this is a pretty dramatic measure on the part of the province, and I think we're learning of situations where some municipalities, and I think you had a caller here from Kelowna. I think Kelowna was one jurisdiction where folks bought condos with the understanding that these were going to be legal for short-term rental, and now they're not anymore because of the provincial changes. So I think there's some unintended consequences that way, and I think some people are really right to be concerned about that.
Good to hear from you, David. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
David Hutniak is CEO of Landlord BC. Let's take another call on the flipping tax now. Maddie is calling from West Vancouver. Hi, Maddie. What do you think of this new legislation that's going to be introduced?
Hi, good afternoon. I think it's a good legislation, but also as your previous person was saying, it is a very small percentage of people probably flipping within the 2 years. It will make a bit of difference, but perhaps not a lot. And I believe for those who were thinking of flipping within a year, now they have to wait 2 years. If this was maybe much longer, 5 years, maybe it would have helped a little bit more. But 2 years, going from 1 year to 2 years, that means you can rent it for a while. And if you wanted to flip it, you just have to wait another year to flip it. But
not enough of a deterrent, then, you say?
Exactly. It's not maybe long enough to discourage people from doing so. But given that there is only a very small percentage of people doing that, I don't think it will make a huge impact on lowering the price of the real estate in BC.
Okay. Yeah,
but there is one area I believe that there might be room to talk more is where, as David, the previous caller, was mentioning too, maybe work with municipalities to see where are the bumps for people to receive permits to build, because I believe one issue that we have is the demand seems to be high. A lot of people either for the first time are entering into the market, or people coming from outside, they want to buy something. There's a shortage of housing. That's why if things goes into multiple offer and they want to purchase it because there is really not much of a supply.
So getting to that bureaucracy.
And this is, I believe this is what we learn at high school, supply and demand.
Okay.
Increase the supply, the demand will somehow meet and it will correct itself. It's just like
Okay.
Everything else.
Maddie, thank you very much. I do have to end it there to get to the news break, but your point is taken, and the measures that David Hutniak was referring to, those are measures that have been introduced by the province. So that was what he was saying and talking about there. And yes, you're right. So in terms of the numbers of residential home sales that were resold within 2 years, between 2020 and 2022, about 7% of those sales were resold within 2 years. So that's what Maddie was referring to as well. Thanks so much for the call. We're going to take more of your calls coming up in the next half hour as well. So Kathy in Campbell River and Rob at Port Alberni, staying on the island there, please do stay tight. We are going to get to you and your thoughts about the new real estate flipping tax announced this morning. And in about 10 minutes from now as well, we'll talk about the new annual child poverty report out today as well. That's all coming up after the CBC News Update with Belle Puri.
Good afternoon. A report on child poverty rates in BC says 2021 there were more than 126,000 children living in poverty. The advocacy group First Call Child and Youth Advocacy Society says while poverty rates saw a sharp decline during the COVID-19 pandemic due to government programs such as the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, rates are climbing again. The report also says income disparity in BC is growing, with families in the highest income bracket making 25 times more than those in the lowest income. More on this part of the story on BC Today. BC Ferries has unveiled 2 designs for new vessels due to enter service in 2029. The ferries will hold up to 360 standard vehicles and 2,100 passengers. The corporation says the designs could be used for up to 7 new ferries over the next 5 years. And some South Thompson residents want to create a support team for BC Wildfire Service crews. The idea is to get a crew of people trained to hit fires before they get out of control. The aim is to prevent a repeat of the extensive damage caused by the White Rock Lake fire in the summer of 2021. A look at the BC weather for this afternoon along the north coast, a mix of sun and cloud. In the Peace region, periods of snow in the central interior as well, a chance of flurries. Possible flurries also in the southeast. For the southern interior, mainly cloudy, but again some flurries. And along the south coast, Greater Victoria, a few rain showers or flurries, a high of 7. And Metro Vancouver, mainly sunny, a high of 6 degrees. That's the CBC News from Vancouver.
Belle, thank you very much. Belle Puri in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. This is BC Today. Now, the provincial government says its home flipping tax legislation will be introduced this spring. And this morning, Premier David Eby shared more details about how the tax will work.
If you are buying a property to sell it within 2 years, you will pay extra tax. This makes the economics more challenging for flippers, and it gives families an advantage over those who are buying homes for the exclusive purpose of selling it again for a profit down the road. The revenue generated from this tax, and let's be honest, we want this revenue to be zero. We don't want people to be flipping homes. Any revenue that's generated by this tax will go back into building affordable housing for British Columbians. Now, we also recognize that there are situations that people might be in where they don't want to sell their place within 2 years, but they have to. Their life circumstances will change. And so that's why we made sure to put exemptions, and you'll see the legislation will come forward, exemptions in place to make sure that people are protected for those life events that they couldn't have anticipated. So for example, the loss of employment, divorce, the death of someone in the family, or they've made the decision that they want to split their home into 2 or 3 in order to support their income by adding a rental unit or adding strata units for sale. So people who are increasing our housing by buying a home and turning it into a duplex or a triplex, people who are suffering events that would cause them to want to sell a home earlier than they really wanted to, death or divorce, they will be covered and protected under the exemptions we will establish under the flipping tax.
That's Premier David Eby speaking in Vancouver this morning. We've been asking for your calls on this as well. Will this flipping tax make a difference? Kathy's been waiting in Campbell River. Hi, Kathy.
Yeah, I wanted to call in mostly to talk about. I just would love to see sort of any effort and more efforts to remove housing, from commodities. So it's no longer can houses and property be used as commodity just for earning money. I just really. I'm older. I'm a senior. I'm about to retire. I'm, getting close to my 70s. I do have a home. I still have a mortgage. I have a rental unit within it that helps me to pay with my house costs, but I probably rent out at half what the current market rating is, and I just do not intend on raising it to what the current market rates are, because that's just unaffordable for most people, even here in Campbell River. And it just, like, if I were to sell my home at current market rates and then even rent at current market rates, I'd be lucky if the money would last me 7 years, 10 years, and then I would be, solely managing on a small amount of CPP and OAP, and that's it. So it's just, like, it just seems so wrong to continue to support any policy that supports using property and housing as commodities. And I don't have the solutions for that. I know developers make far too much money, and anybody who buys a home and flips it makes way too much money. So anything that helps with that, I think, would be good.
Kathy, thank you very much.
Thank
Rob,
you.
Take care. Rob in Port Alberni, what are your thoughts on the flipping tax? Hi, Rob.
Hi.
Yes, what are your thoughts on this new flipping tax?
Well, it's developed into quite an issue here over time, but I have to say that regarding today's decision, it's an important move in the right direction, and I applaud the Premier for his courage in moving in that direction. But still, there have to be some tough strategic decisions have to be made for the future so this doesn't get out of control.
Okay.
Investors should take their money and put it into green initiatives.
Looking at other things, and our previous caller as well, Kathy, was talking about try and change this idea of housing as investment, and you're saying if you're an investor, try to perhaps move that money into green initiatives. Rob, thank you very much for your call, and Sheena is our final call on this from Victoria. Hi, Sheena.
Hi. I think, what everyone's just been saying is perfect. We need to stop thinking of housing as an investment. The REITs are the worst possible thing because housing is a human right. Now, this won't have a huge effect, but it's part of what needs to be a slate of measures to reverse what we have allowed to happen over the last 30 or 40 years. So it's an every little bit helps thing.
Okay. Sheena?
And anything that sends the message that Canada is no longer going to allow housing to be an investment rather than a place for people to live, which is what it needs to be.
Sheena, thank you very much for your call in Victoria. Good to have you. Thanks for all of your calls. And if you want to email us your thoughts on the flipping tax, our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. It's 12:39, 1:39 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC Radio 1, on CBC Television, and live streaming as well on our website, cbc.ca/BC. On YouTube, CBC Vancouver is how you can search for us. You can use the CBC News app as well. I'm Michelle Elliott. Very nice to be with you. Well, each year, the group First Call Child and Youth Advocacy Center publishes a child poverty report card, and it sheds light on the rates of child poverty in the province. It also makes recommendations to address it. And this year's report card is out today. It finds that after a sharp decline in poverty due to CERB payments, child poverty is rising again in BC, in particular for very young children, as well as children living on First Nations reserves. Their recommendations include raising the minimum wage to $20 per hour, increasing disability rates, and building, more affordable and supportive housing. Housing comes up once again. And we're going to hear from First Call in a moment. We're also asking you, how does child poverty affect your community? And what are the long-term consequences of child poverty in our province? What does the government need to do? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email us as well, bctoday@cbc.ca. And once again, by text, you can reach us at 236-330-2623. Adrienne Montani is Executive Director of First Call Child and Youth Advocacy Center. She joins me here in our studio. Hello, welcome.
Hello, nice to be here.
Good to have you with us. Tell us what you found this year. What makes this year different?
Well, this is 2021 data because there's always a lag when you get it. And so we looked at tax filer data, comes from Statistics Canada, and the child poverty rate is starting to trend up again. It did go down rather dramatically, a good almost 5 points in BC in 2020, but 2021 it's back up to 14.3%, and that's 126,000 children who are poor in this province. 1 in every 7 children is poor.
1 in every 7 children is poor. And how do you measure that?
We measure it, the database we use is tax filer data, and then we measure that against something called the low income measure, which is takes a median income for all Canadians, 50%, so that would be the median, and then 50% below that is the poverty line.
Okay.
So it's a relative measure of poverty compared to everybody else.
And I know you talked about the CERB payments. You know, what do you attribute to this now trending in an increase that you're observing?
Well, 2021 was a year when the CERB payments were starting. There's still some. And if you read the report, you can see the actual percentage that this made a difference. So we know what works to reduce child poverty. One of the public policy, we call them government transfers, to direct income transfers to families that makes the biggest difference is the Canada Child Benefit, which includes the BC Family Benefit. And I just want to say that First Call was responsible for making the BC Family Benefit, used to be called the Early Childhood Tax Benefit, and we presented a brief to government a few years back and said this needs to go beyond age 6 all the way to 18, and also that it should be doubled in size. And they basically responded to that. So the BC Family Benefit is rolled in with the Canada Child Benefit, and that policy does the heavy lifting. It's based on income. If you're low income, you get the full, and if you the full maximum amount. And so we know what works, and we know that we could see the lesson from the years when there was a lot more direct income support to families and individuals from CERB, that in fact we lowered the child poverty rate. Guess what? So we know what works, we just need to do more of it in that regard.
And there's an element of that in the budget, wasn't there? So tell us about that, because there's another bonus, I guess is what it is.
Yes, they've said they'll increase it by 25% for all families. Whatever they're getting now will be increased by 25%, but it's only for 1 year, which we're not happy about at First Call. We'd like to see that. Our recommendation has been always index it so that it doesn't lose value over time, because inflation is happening and costs are going up for families. So that boost to the lowest income really needs to continue.
And what they have announced is this 1-year BC Family Benefit bonus for 340,000 low to middle income families, which they average to be about $445 more over that 12-month period. You're saying that's not enough?
Well, I'm saying it'll be different amounts for different families depending on the number of children and that kind of thing, but and their ages. But yeah, it's not enough. It's not $445 this year is not enough. Last year they gave it a 10% increase. So this is 25%, not bad, but again, just making it a permanent increase is what we really need. This is because it makes it look like it's an election thing.
I'm going to ask you more about what you do want to see, what your recommendations are, and also about the specific demographics who are more significantly affected by child poverty. My guest is Adrienne Montani, Executive Director of the First Call Child and Youth Advocacy Center. Their annual child poverty report card is out today. And as you heard her say, 1 in every 7 children is considered poor in this province. And so we're asking you, how does child poverty affect your community? What do you think are the long-term consequences of it? And what does the government need to do to address it? We just had the BC budget released last week. Does it go far enough? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, we're at bctoday@cbc.ca. And by text as well, it's 236-330-2623. And so you found that certain groups, by age, birth to 5 years old, have higher rates of poverty over the previous year. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, we always monitor the early years, so under 6 years old or 0 to 5, because those are such formative years for families. It's really important, and so yes, it went back up again also for that age group. It's not that much different than the overall rate, but it went up a little bit again, and that's a trend we don't want to see, obviously.
And when it comes to, I mean, we were talking about housing in the last half hour. We talk often about grocery, food prices. I mean, how do those, how has inflation, I guess, and rising interest rates, how have they contributed to exacerbate the rates of child poverty in this province?
Oh, it's tremendously stressful for families because their incomes aren't matching the increase in inflation for low-income families, for sure. Before I answer fully your question on that, I wanted to mention also one of the groups that are really, so when we say there's 14% of child poverty in BC, it's actually 40% for children in lone parent families. So that's just worth reminding ourselves. It's been 50% for many years, and then it finally started to come down. It went down to 38% with those extra payments, and now it's back up to 40%. So that's a really high rate, and that's 80% of those families are female-led. So this is women's poverty, and the issue of can you work? So when needing money to pay for housing and food, and childcare if you need to work. And if you can't find the money for that, then you can't work unless you have free childcare somehow.
Well, there's so many tentacles to this, right? Because as well, and a premier was asked today, where is the $10 childcare expansion? How are we doing on that front to enable more of those single parents, most of them women, to go back into the workforce?
Yeah, well, there wasn't a big bump in the budget for that. They're mostly relying on the federal money coming through, it seems, and not adding. So I don't know. It's supposed to be a 10-year plan. It seems to be a bit stalled. There's lots of reasons. They're having trouble filling jobs because they don't pay well. So we have low-income workers who can't afford their own childcare. That's an interesting one.
Right.
Yeah,
it's a domino effect.
It's and so there's testimonials from families who said, I thought I was going to be out of the workforce maybe for 5 years if I can't work when my children are very young. But once they're school age, I thought I'd go back to work. And these mothers tell us, but now it's been 10 years because there's not enough after-school childcare. And I can only work part-time because I have to be there at 3 to pick them up, or I have to. So this is really hindering people. And some are working multiple jobs in couple families. They're working 2 or 3 jobs between them. It's really putting a lot of stress on them.
Before I get to our audience comments, Adrian, do you want to tell us as well about what you did find in terms of disproportionate impact on children living on First Nations reserves? Yes,
so it's only data from 67 First Nations reserves. Small population, sometimes they suppress the data. So it's 31%. Poverty rate for the 67 we have a snapshot of for the 2021. And the rate is a bit higher on rural reserves as opposed to urban reserves.
Okay. Let's put out the phone numbers once again as we ask you how concerned you are about the rates of child poverty in our province, and are you seeing an impact of child poverty in your community? What do you think of those long-term consequences? What might be some solutions? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone, and by email bctoday@cbc.ca. Katya wrote us from Smithers. In April of 1997, child support payments were no longer tax deductible. I believe this decreased the funds that single parents received from their former spouses in 2 ways. First, child support orders are being challenged more frequently by the payer as the incentive for these parents were removed. Second, it created a situation where some parents who should support their children worked less to decrease the amount they would, or work less in order to decrease the amount they would be ordered to pay. This hugely affected the amount that was available to raise, especially young children, in a more and more expensive environment. It is an example of how a change in government policy has directly affected and continues to affect generations of children. Thank you for bringing up the child poverty topic. And we have a question from Risha by email. What does your guest think of a universal school lunch program? Other countries have this. Why can't we?
We're strong advocates at First Call Child and Youth Advocacy Society for a universal school lunch program. We're part of a national coalition arguing for that to
There
happen.
have been some calls for it, right?
There's lots of calls, a very strong national coalition for this because other countries do it on a national level. So that's very important to provide. It reduces stress for even middle-income families to have a meal in the school. I just want to say, though, and this nutritionists and other advocates for food insecurity will tell you that it's not a solution to child poverty. It helps. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that would help with an extra meal or during lunch, that kind of thing. But it doesn't raise families' income so that they can buy enough food 24/7.
Okay, and it's only obviously at school.
That's right. And so when school's not in place, what happens then?
Oh,
oops.
Okay, I'll put out the phone numbers once again and help you out there. Our number again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can email us to bctoday@cbc.ca. Let us know how child poverty affects your community. And what do you think the government can do about it? The First Call Child Poverty Report Card is out today, and Adrian Montani joins us now. We're talking about possible solutions now, and we heard that email from Risha saying, what about a universal school lunch program? What are your recommendations? Mm-hmm. What does government need to do here?
Well, one thing to note is that I want to bust a myth that, in fact, most poor children live with parents who don't work, because that's actually the majority of children who are poor that we're counting in these statistics have parents in the workforce. But low wages is a big issue. So raising the minimum wage, we have a recommendation in there to raise the minimum wage to $20 an hour by 2026. Government's been pretty good. They've been raising it. It's gotten up to, we were advocating for $15 at one point, but now the cost. But then, so living wages, because minimum
16
wage
now, right? 16.
It's $16.75. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. But it needs to keep going up, and living wages are what we advocate, because we are not advocating just for families to hit the poverty line. We'd like them to be over it because it relieves financial stress. It's good for family health, mental health, physical health.
And that's a $20 mark.
That would a living wage is actually even higher than that. So bring the minimum wage up to 20. A living wage, as calculated by the Living Wage Campaign in BC, is more like $24 an hour. It depends on the area.
When where you are.
Yeah, where you are.
Okay.
But yeah, we need to pay attention that wages, so income supports supplemented by or good wages supplemented by income supports when wages are too low.
Let's take a call. And we've been asking you what you feel are the long-term consequences of child poverty in BC. Roman is joining us from Port Alberni. Hi, Roman.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for this interesting and important topic.
Yes, and what are your thoughts on the role of child poverty in our communities and what the long-term consequences are?
Well, I think in line with everything we're talking about since the big budget announcements, this should be the top of the list in terms of priorities we're addressing. Because you can have all the resources in the world, you can have all the infrastructure in the world, you can have all the other elements to make yourself a more profound, a more effective, let's say for our sake, a more effective province, someone to be reckoned with. But every chance we take away from children to prosper and to grow and to thrive takes away all the future opportunities that would be included for us to also thrive and not just survive. Because I think it's all about also building healthy mindsets and spirit sets. If you have a population of people growing up in such an austere environment, it's going to be very difficult to find that the spirit of adventure, the spirit of innovation, and the spirit of, how do we call this? Where there's a will to make change, where there's a will to seek something. And I think
more of an expansive mindset,
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's the best investment we can make in our future collectively to make sure children are growing up in a thriving environment. One, we're not worried about where their next meal is going to be or why they don't get to have the same lunches as the other kids and why they have to live the way that they do under a life of apparent punishment in terms of what they might perceive.
Mm-hmm. Roman, thank you very much. That's a very interesting point. Growing up in always in survival mode, right? What are the long-term impacts of child poverty?
Well, I think, thank you, Roman. That's exactly what we have also, and that's why we use the measure we do, is income inequality is actually one of the strongest negative social determinants of health, the bigger the gap between the rich and the poor. Because it's a form of social exclusion. The children who are poor don't live in a completely poor society. They have access to the internet and all kinds of, they see what other children have. So we hear from parents that kids wish they had the same lunch as other kids had, or the same, being able to engage in those confidence building activities that their parents can't afford, recreational activities, all kinds of things. So it is a form of social exclusion, and we see it as a form of violence against children, if they can't, especially when you can't meet your basic necessities, not enough food and stuff like that. So the long-term health impacts are very, very profound. If you grow up in poverty and you suffer both the stress and the poor nutrition, those kinds of things, your risk of other chronic disease later on in adult, even if you go on to an affluent life, those impacts on your health will still remain. So it's very important. So I really appreciate that. And so in the report, we have some stats on income insecurity, income inequality, and you can see that of the families who are in the top 10% earners, earn 25 times what the bottom 10% make. And that's an increase, again, when the CERB was coming through, and those, we were bringing the bottom up, and that gap was smaller, and now it's starting to widen again. So growing income inequality is a recipe for an unhealthy society.
Okay. Adrienne, thank you very much for joining us and describing all of this.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Adrienne Montani, Executive Director of the First Call Child and Youth Advocacy Center. Again, the annual First Call Child and Youth Advocacy Center's report card on child poverty out today, and they keep tabs. Yes, what is the website people can go to?
So it's First Call Child and Youth Advocacy Society, and it's firstcallbc.org.
firstcallbc.org. Firstcallbc.org.
There are maps of smaller communities. You can see what the poverty looks like in your community.
In your community. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's it for our show today. Our email, bctoday@cb.